Yeah, I guess the way I wanted to start, because it's actually the research I did helping me to read the play, and we're talking about the first play of the Oresteia, Agamemnon by Aeschylus, is I had to sort of remind myself of a couple things. One, I needed to refamiliarize myself with some of the headlines about Greek tragedy, because I probably haven't read a Greek tragedy since high school. I don't remember which one we read or discussed, but I do remember talking about Greek tragedy in high school. And also just sort of like the timeline of Aeschylus's life and where this writing and the popularity of tragedy falls among, because when I started, reading this, when we chose to do this, I had a sense that this probably came after Homer, just because Homer is, I don't know, in all the Greek sources we have, Homer is already in the past. So I knew it was sort of after that, but I couldn't place, the timeline exactly. So I think I sent you, my basic understanding is that people think, to the extent that the Trojan War was real. I mean, we know Troy existed now, but to the extent that there were real events that happened that inspired all these myths of the Trojan War, and I think probably something happened, because why have this be
Why would there
such
be
a,
this big story about it? Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I think people think that was like 1500, between 1500 and 1200 BC, and then Homer's writing his epics about those events in like 800 BC, and then another 300 years forward, and you get Aeschylus. And I guess part of what distinguishes Aeschylus in this period of Greek tragedy is, at this time, Greece is now an actual democracy. And so sort of I mean, a lot of the secondary sources I was reading were really focused on how the change in Greek culture and politics sort of informed uh, the differences in the writing. So for me, it was relevant to, and a lot of what I did with ChatGPT and the other AIs I have access to is just ask about the contrast between how Homer presents these events and how Aeschylus presented them. Um,
Yeah, well, so now since we're getting into it, I feel the need to take a second and just explain to anybody who's listening that, well, I'm Alex and this is my friend Evan. Some of you maybe are familiar with me doing some stuff solo. Hopefully, Evan and I are going to be doing some stuff together in the future. I'll keep doing the things I had been doing, but we'll be doing these as well. As he mentioned, we are looking at the first play in the Oresteia, Agamemnon by Aeschylus. So that's the first couple minutes. We just sort of airdropped into it, but that's where we are. Yeah, but I agree. In high school, the one tragedy I can remember reading is Antigone, and maybe we'll get to that one eventually. But yeah, I've been doing more reading of ancient Greek stuff in the last few years. So I was a little bit oriented on what you just mentioned about Homer being basically 8th century BC. And then there's a big cluster of things that are like 5th century BC, like Plato and Aristotle and all the playwrights that you can think of, or that I can think of, are basically right there. And Homer is much earlier. And Hesiod also is like in that kind of time frame. But then there was, like, I think not too much. I don't know what was going on in the 6th and 7th centuries BC. Maybe there was. Certainly there are some people, but there's a big cluster in like the 5th century BC. And so yeah, it's helpful to be oriented on that.
One thing I remember from high school that really interested me, and I think I still like hold on to this, is our teacher said something. They always teach it, the contrast between tragedy and comedy, and the sort of counterintuitive thing that they told us is that comedy is sort of nihilistic, because in comedy, like, humans are portrayed as bumbling. They aren't smart enough to anticipate the secondary effects of their actions, so they're just making mistakes. You can imagine a lot of, Shakespeare's comedies or stuff. People are trying to fall in love with one person, they fall in love with another, or they send a romantic gesture, it goes to the wrong person. They're just bumbling, but at the end, it all resolves rather happily. Like the incompetence of humans is shown to not be that dangerous. And this was explained as nihilistic because it means there's no stakes. Like humans can't make the right decision, but it also doesn't matter what decisions they make. And that tragedy is like this deeply, um, I don't know what the antonym of nihilism is, but tragedy like puts the highest stakes possible on the decisions of human beings. And usually in tragedy, the characters are making the wrong decisions, but implicit is that they could have made different decisions. That they were not bound to do the wrong thing. They could have not follied, but they follied, and the consequences of their folly are incredibly wide ranging. So it sort of is the art form that takes human choice and human behavior most seriously. And I
It has
remember,
consequences. Yeah.
yeah, really liking that because I was sort of like, yeah, like uh there's something, I don't know, there's something deeply true about that where where like I sort of feel like grumpy people and sad people are actually like they might call you a nihilist in high school if you're emo, but actually like you're taking life very seriously. And like the not do their homework weed smokers, these are like the real nihilists because to them nothing like you're upset because you think things matter. And the people who are happy and moving along. I mean, maybe I'm less curmudgeonly now than I was then, but I felt very like defensive of this posture. Like, yes, if you take things seriously, you'll often come off as a drag. Um, but yeah, so I think and it reminds me of, I think it's a line from the Odyssey. This is like a little bit of a digression, but is it in the Odyssey where Odysseus or someone says, like, the gods are jealous of us because we only get to make, it's like the gods are jealous of mortals because the decisions we make,
That's too
we only,
specific for me. It seems like the
okay.
Odyssey, but yeah, I don't remember
Uh,
exactly. Yeah.
but yeah, this idea that there's something so valuable about like the finitude of life and um, not being able to reverse the choices you make. Whereas, a god, if they're immortal, they get do-overs, but humans don't. And so the the stakes of human decision are in some sense greater than those of the gods, and that's very romantic. And it's also like it sort of reminds me, like thinking about that stuff, that in a way it's like deeply anti-Christian because there is this, the Christian thing is sort of that everything can be reversed too, right? Whatever mistakes you make, as long as in the final moments, you accept the Lord or express regret, sincere regret over your misdeeds, you can be redeemed. And it seems like tragedy is like in some sense the opposite of that. It's like, nope, you're defined by the choices you make forever, and they are irrevocable.
So
Um,
Christianity is more comedian in that sense. It's more connected
Yeah,
to
maybe. And certainly, I mean, I don't know enough about these figures, but I imagine that Nietzsche or some of these other figures that take the Greeks more seriously as thinkers than Christians would say, yeah, Christianity sort of undercuts the stakes of human life because ultimately, as long as you reverse and apologize to God, nothing you do, is irrevocable. Whereas the Greeks had this capacity to take human life extremely seriously, even if there was nothing after it. Or Greeks believed in Hades and stuff. I'm not saying they didn't believe in an afterlife, but they still had like a much I don't know, a much higher stakes. And it's interesting too, whenever I'm reading about like screenwriting or writing short stories and stuff, they always say like what as your story proceeds, you have to raise stakes, and sort of, and people criticize even like Marvel movies. Every movie is about the end of the universe because that's the highest possible stakes there can be. So you can't get more compelling than that. But the Greeks too had sort of like at least in the period of tragic plays, they had very good intuition for getting to like the stakes of the human soul as one of the most dramatic things you can explore. But before we go further, do you want to take a shot at giving a brief synopsis of the play?
uh, yeah, sure. I mean, the good news, at least with this play, is that the plot is quite straightforward. In like the last few pages, there's some stuff to untangle. But so quickly, we've been talking about the Trojan War. Agamemnon is away fighting in basically in the Iliad. He's fighting in Troy for 10 years. And Clytemnestra is back in Mycenae. They're waiting for him to come back. And then he eventually does come back. And he basically arrives. He gets there and he has his new concubine, Cassandra, of whom Clytemnestra is obviously not fond. Clytemnestra is Agamemnon's wife. And she then kills both of them. And the spoilers, sorry, I guess we should have done that earlier. But there, I mean, it's a 2,500-year-old play. If you hadn't read it yet, it's your fault. But then Aegisthus comes on stage, somebody who hasn't appeared yet. And Aegisthus is the lover of Clytemnestra. And he explains this backstory, which I kind of wonder how much of it would have been familiar to the audience. Like, did they know this was coming, or was it like this was material that was used in a lot of different contexts and Aeschylus used it also? Or is this some of his invention? It seems like some of it might have been, but some of it is drawn from other places. Like you can find pages where they're like, well, this source uses that also, but this detail is different or whatever. But
Yeah.
the backstory is Aegisthus is the son of Thyestes, who is the brother of Atreus, and Atreus is Agamemnon's father. So Aegisthus and Agamemnon are cousins. The previous generation, Thyestes and Atreus, they had this drama where this part is not in Agamemnon, but it's part of it. Thyestes slept with Atreus's wife. They had a power battle over Mycenae, and Atreus had the golden sheep. He had a sheep that was, I don't know, solid gold. Or maybe it gave golden fleece. It wasn't. It's distinct from the golden fleece. It's not that, but it's somehow a golden sheep, and that gave him the right to rule Mycenae. But then Thyestes starts sleeping with his wife, and his wife Erope gives the golden sheep to Thyestes. But then Atreus chases him out, and he eventually comes back. But then, and he like wants to come back, and Atreus agrees to let him come back. But then he kills both of his sons and tricks Thyestes into eating them. This is like the really vicious cannibalistic climax or something of this story. And Aegisthus is now righting these wrongs, both that his brothers were murdered. It's not clear why Aegisthus wasn't. He either wasn't born yet, or maybe he was too young or something. He wasn't there. But also there's this intergenerational power battle over the city. And it even goes back further than that because, and this is now out, well, we'll leave it there for now. There's more, you can go back further in the mythology. But that basically is the story of Agamemnon in this play, the specific play. So
Yeah, and it's very interesting to me that this layered betrayal comes in at the end. I assume, to address your question, I assume that the audience would be familiar with Aegisthus's backstory. I don't know why I'm not a scholar of the period. I just sort of thought that legend was like sort of in the ether, but maybe that's not true. We could look into that. But
yeah,
it's interesting that the ostensible betrayal that is being avenged throughout the course of the play is Clytemnestra's anger at Agamemnon for sacrificing their daughter,
right. So yeah,
Iphigenia. How do you say?
I'd say Iphigenia. I don't know.
Iphigenia, that's
Yeah.
right. For sacrificing their daughter to get winds to be
Of
able
course.
to,
No, that's
to
totally
sail
important, and
to Troy.
I'm
Yeah. So that's the betrayal that you think is being avenged, and then at the end you realize that there's
this other thing.
actual additional betrayals spanning generations, and I think that's really important thematically for a couple of reasons. One is that I think the play sort of contrasts the personal with the political. Like I think the audience is asked to question whether Clytemnestra is actually killing Agamemnon because of the death of her daughter, or if the reasons are more personal, that Clytemnestra is jealous of Cassandra, or does Clytemnestra want to rule with her new lover, and the death of Iphigenia is just pretext. She knows the public, the chorus, to some extent will understand her grief, and so that can be uh, the way in to kill Agamemnon, but really she just wants power. And I think Aegisthus's story shows us that the personal and the political are actually linked, because the drama of his family and these previous betrayals is actually linked to who ends up ruling. And so these two things are maybe one and the same. But it is, do you have an opinion on because I think most of the secondary sources I read and the videos I sent you, I think the common interpretation, at least among the scholars I saw, was that Clytemnestra is indeed grieving for Iphigenia. She felt betrayed by that, but that she is a very smart and conniving person, and so whenever the pretext arrived for her to take power from her husband, she would have used. In other words, if Iphigenia hadn't been killed, maybe there would have been some other betrayal, because this was a very savvy and ambitious woman.
Yeah, would she have done it anyway if Iphigenia hadn't been killed? Seems likely. Seems like she has plenty of reasons. She also, she has her lover that she's been living with for 10 years, or some up to 10 years. And then there's the thing with Iphigenia, and then he comes home with Cassandra. I mean, she has a lot of reasons that she could choose from. If I guess we'd have to look at, well, and there is this thing running throughout the play that we talked about in text, that she's described in a couple different spots as sort of manly, not like in posture, but the way that she acts. So it's possible that you might interpret that as being a little bit more political, that she wants to be in power, that she wants to be in political life in a major way, and maybe that's sort of it's
Yes,
signals that. Because I was going to say
that is how I interpreted it. That
yeah,
it seems like when the chorus is comparing her to a man, they're saying she's capable of manipulating events in a way similar to a man.
yeah. Well, and that she cares enough to want to do that, about being in power, and because I was going to say we'd have to look at the text and see some spot where it seems like she would be willing to do that it's not just about Iphigenia or whatever. But I think you could do that. I don't know
Yeah,
how
I
else
mean,
you would get.
I think it's interesting that, to talk about the form of the play for a little bit. I think I read that these tragedies would usually be performed by two or three actors, and there's more than two or three characters, and so people are switching in and out playing multiple characters. And one of the interesting things about the form is you have, the characters that move the plot, in this case, Agamemnon, Clytemnestra, Cassandra, Aegisthus. They're, they're moving the action and sometimes giving you a picture of their motivations. And there are other plays where the chorus is sort of like an all-knowing, omniscient body, but that is not the case in this play. In this play, the chorus is very like befuddled. They're made up of like men who were too old to go to war,
Yeah, and they're
and
always like asking what's going on, like, oh, what are you going to say now? And yeah, they're almost like the audience.
right. And reading it in modern times, it's very striking their inability to pick up what's going on, because Cassandra is pretty straightforwardly like, Clytemnestra's secretly pissed off. She's going to kill Agamemnon and me. And the chorus is like, we can't interpret these dark premonitions. What do you mean? And she's like, she's going to kill us. And they're like, yeah, this
Yeah,
is weird.
he's
We
like,
don't get,
yeah, it seems
like,
pretty explicit.
they're in denial. So, but what's interesting about that is, because the characters we see, Clytemnestra is lying most of the time that we see her talking to her husband upon his return. She's pretending to be excited, and the chorus is confused. We don't have direct access to the motivations of Clytemnestra, at least not before she kills Agamemnon and Cassandra. We have her sort of dissembling speech and the confusion of the chorus. Um, so you have to speculate to some extent.
Well, and now I'm wondering whether maybe if Agamemnon hadn't sacrificed Iphigenia, maybe she wouldn't have been involved in it anyway. She just would have left it alone. Like you could read the manliness thing like the opposite way, which is like no, she wants to settle this score, and if it were just her boyfriend or whatever, then that she would have let that go, and I don't know, she would have figured out some way to close that file. But because of Iphigenia, you could read it the other way, that she then like went into action for that. I don't know. That one's kind of tough.
One like funny question I have is, when you read secondary sources or you sort of read the modern interpretation of these ancient works, do you ever like I had the experience a few times of seeing what the sort of accepted interpretation of a part of the play is and thinking, oh, somebody smart that people couldn't question came up with this a
And
hundred
that's
years ago,
just
but it's
it's spread
complete nonsense.
by
Like,
social contagion, not by yeah.
yes, like there's
Direct
very
reading.
interesting interpretations that perhaps rely on understandings of ancient Greek or Greek culture that I don't have. But when Clytemnestra uh, gets Agamemnon to step on the tapestry,
All right.
there are very interesting interpretations of this. So just to lay the groundwork for the audience who hasn't read, when Agamemnon arrives home, and if I describe this wrong in any way, interrupt me.
Of course.
She Clytemnestra is saying like something about remove your sandals and step on this tapestry, and it sort of seems like she's saying like put your feet on something soft, or the war's over, you can take your shoes off and relax. And he's sort of saying no, that will look haughty, that will look arrogant. And then she says something to convince him. And I read it very straightforwardly as um she's just trying to make him look fancy so that later, or like to act very kingly in a hubristic way. Something about putting your feet on like an expensive beautiful tapestry was something only a very fancy person would do, and she's trying to get him to do that so he looks a little bad, so that later when she's justifying having killed him, the public, the chorus, will remember him acting that way. But there are very weird interpretations of that scene. Um, I'll mute and see if I can find them real quick because they're not coming to me. But did you sort of agree with my interpretation reading it?
Yeah. So I that's an added. I hadn't thought of that in particular, but I think that's totally plausible. The one I had, my immediate response to that, the one I mentioned you before, was that she's getting ready to kill him, and she wants to just overwhelm him with affection. And I mean, because this tapestry, I think basically we're talking about rolling out the red carpet. That yeah, this tapestry is an expensive thing, and you are so honored and so victorious that you should step on it, and just you deserve every luxury that we can provide for you, to put him at ease, so that later when she kills him in the bath or whatever it is, he doesn't expect it, because the only way that she's going to be able to pull this off is if he has no hint that it's coming. And but yeah, I think that what you said totally makes sense, and that kind of fits into the same category. Those are both kind of political science interpretations of this, but I think that's as valid as anything else. But it's possible that people who have been in the humanities for several decades maybe get wound around the axle in some other way, or maybe if you actually speak ancient Greek, then you have all kinds of context that makes something
Yes,
else make more sense.
so I
But
I was just looking at some things. The thing they say that's interesting, that's sort of true, but to me seems like a very inhuman interpretation, is they say that Clytemnestra doesn't actually make any argument. Like basically, she tells him to step on the tapestry, the red carpet, as we're calling it. He says no, And then she's basically like, "Come on, do it." And he says, "Oh, okay."
Okay.
And they're all remarking, that's strange that she doesn't really make any compelling case that he should do it, and yet she successfully changes his mind. But I sort of thought like there's a much more human and intuitive way to read that, which is just like your wife badgers you and you give
Yeah.
in. Like wives
Well,
generally don't bring new evidence to the third or fourth time they ask you to do something. They just keep saying it, and eventually you break. Like
yeah. Well, and so what did you get to like what they say about she doesn't give any new evidence and this shows what? I don't know. Do they go any further than that or?
I think they were saying that it shows something about like the foolishness of Agamemnon and sort of like his confusion. Um,
Yeah, because I would throw on top of that that like even yeah, I mean your wife is one thing, but in another context, if a friend is like trying to honor you in some small way, the first thing you're gonna do is go, oh come on, no 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 no, and then he's go, oh you really should, and then you'll you might not do it on the second time, but if they insist a lot, you'll be like, all right, let's get this thing over with. It it makes more sense in some contexts, but there's a very basic social thing that goes on there that I think is pretty normal
right.
in a lot of ways.
Well, this gets to an interesting question uh, that I think about a lot when I read these things, which is like, so there's this whole process of translation, right? And you do translation, and translation is not just. I mean, you can look into the philosophy of a translator, but you know, translation is not just word to word changes. It is really making changes to put events and phrases in a light that a modern audience can understand. And so whenever I'm doing the thing we just did, which is I'm transposing a dynamic that I observe today, men and wives convincing each other of something, and I'm assuming that that's a human universal and that that would have existed in the time this play was written, because it seems to me there's no reason that it wouldn't have. It's just a very basic. And I constantly read these things into old works, and I never know if I'm, there's a famous Babylonian tablet that literally it's apparently real, but it's from like 2500 BC, and it says like parents no or teenagers no longer listen to their parents, like no one is literate, like it's all going to hell. And it appears to be these, it's a complaint about like teenagers not taking their culture seriously, but from 4,000 years ago. So it's like, oh, things never change. But you don't know, do we just have this will to identify? And so we're projecting so much. I'll give you another example. Did you know Tom Holland's book Dominion?
No.
Tom Holland is this historian of Christianity. And basically, his whole argument is that Christian morality, as understood today, which is sort of like identifying with the weak, with the stranger, being against bullies, protecting those who can't protect themselves, that this is like not intuitive to humanity at all, and that Christianity popularized this way of thinking. But when I read Greek stuff, I feel like I see, and I'm not thinking of Agamemnon particularly here, but like I feel like I still see those ideas. Yes, there will be veneration of the strong uh, in ways that maybe later Christian societies would be uncomfortable with, but still, in part, heroes seem to be defined by using their strength to protect the weak, not just to. And so, whenever people say like, "Oh, the morality of humans," so I guess what I'm asking you is, I don't know, am I genuinely detecting uh, some of these ideas that people claim are modern in ancient things, or have those ideas been rendered as part of a translation to make this stuff intelligible to modern audiences? I'm
Well,
sure I am projecting to some degree, but I do think I have sort of like a universalist through time perspective where I'm like, yeah, no, people always knew that. you know.
I think if we're gonna, I mean, it's a 2,500-year-old play. 25 centuries is a long time. It's like 458 BC, I think. Oh, that's a detail worth mentioning, by the way, is that this apparently premiered 2 years before Aeschylus's death. So there's some number, they have 100 or so plays. Well, they think there were 100 or so plays of his, but only 7 remain. And there was maybe a bunch of other trilogies. This is the only trilogy. There's stuff we didn't mention, but could have. But not only is this like a surviving trilogy, it seems to have been very late in his life. There was like, and the ancient Greek dates, sometimes they're a little bit messy, but with this, it seems like people are pretty confident that he died in 456 BC, and this was written or was premiered in 458 BC, if I'm remembering those numbers correctly. But so it's an old play. It's a very old play. So it's plausible that, you know, things are very different. They were very different 2,500 years ago, and we can't interpret them, whatever. But if we're going to assume that they're so alien that any natural interpretation that we would have is just off the mark, then it's almost like, what's the point of reading them? I think that it's fair to take the natural response. Somebody dies and you're suddenly upset. Oh no, this character died. Like the regular knee-jerk reactions we have, we can often take those as sort of the first layer. And if somebody says like, no, no, that's the wrong way to interpret that, it has to be this other thing, it's then on them to explain why that's the case. And they can bring in whatever, you know, other sources, or this meant this at the time or something. But if somebody's saying your interpretation about what's going on with the tapestry is just your modern, you're superimposing something on the past, they kind of have to explain why that is, I think. Because I think so in this world, they might have more of a sense of like honor and somebody being too haughty or not haughty enough or as the king or whatever. That would have been a very subtle barometer, whereas a lot of that has been kind of flattened out by democracy for us in the last few hundred years. So that kind of thing, I don't know. I don't know that it would be because he just was dumb. That seems too simple.
Well, yeah, because there are very many people, including people I like, that say that, and again, I'm probably just revealing my own ignorance here, but I'm going to make the argument. You know, there are people on the internet, I think Leo Strauss was like this, I think Nietzsche was like this, where he sort of says like the mindset of the Greeks is like the most alien thing. Like this was a high culture, we're a low culture. They took philosophy and ideas seriously. They had such a different morality. But to me, everything I engage with from this period seems super modern and like they were concerned with the exact same stuff we are concerned with, and that they had sort of a meta awareness about their own culture that's fascinating to think of existing in the past. Like, to give an example, in this play, like, I think we are supposed to know as the audience that Agamemnon is sort of a rube. Like, he's a successful king, but he is led by the nose by various different women. I mean, at certain points it's Clytemnestra, at other points it's Cassandra. So this play from, 500 years before the birth of Christ, it's showing that like a king can be sort of an idiot, and that it may happen that there are very smart, ambitious women around him, but they know that they can't challenge his power directly, and so they have to, um, they have to sort of use manipulation and cunning
Well, and to
to,
play politics. I mean, this is where it might have
yeah,
been that Clytemnestra, what she really did care about was Iphigenia, but it turns out that her boyfriend also has this beef with this whole family, and she's like, "All right, well, I
right.
can use this other man to help me settle my score." And yeah, I mean that's
No, and what I liked, what I was saying to you in my email, what I find so moving about like Greek art and Shakespeare is they do this weird thing that I don't know how you do it, where each character in the play is often acting cynically or self-motivated, but somehow at the macro level, like this play is very interested in the ideal of justice and how justice might be achieved, even if any individual character in the play uh, would have no ability to seek out justice because they're too self-concerned. And I was just thinking about how modern art that like deals with the ideal, if you think about a movie like Thank You for Smoking, I don't know if you ever
That's the
uh
one that's like it's a documentary about the nicotine industry and all the lobbying
it's
that's
it's
on
not a documentary,
it.
but
Oh,
it's about
I must be
a
thinking of something else.
cigarette lobbyist, and it just
Okay.
has this very snide, nihilistic tone. And I was trying to think like maybe the Coen brothers or some other things, but it's like what modern artist can present characters that are all sort of flawed idiots, but the whole time that themes of romance, themes of justice, that the author takes those themes incredibly seriously, even as none of the characters are heroic or capable of embodying those ideals. I think Shakespeare is like that. I think maybe Dostoevsky is like that. But it's just like a quality of high art, and I really enjoyed it. But yeah, I didn't mean to move off like what's modern about this, but they're related because the politics are modern because these terrible like flawed humans at the end of these three plays we'll hopefully do uh, episodes on the other two, but they sort of create the concept of a trial in an attempt to end the cycles of revenge that the events starting in Agamemnon trip off. And so in a way it's a story of how Greek democracy arrived at like the concept of a court or uh, trying someone for their misdeeds. And so that's like a modern institution we still grapple with. And I don't know. It's just so interesting. It does not seem alien to me at all, is the
Yeah.
headline here. Like
Yeah.
there is language in some of the translations that I found difficult to parse. And so I had to go through a couple different translations until I found out or felt like I knew what was going on. And a reader of Greek would probably say, well, that's a bad sign because because that means you're traveling further and further from the original meaning. And maybe that's true. And I'd love to talk to someone who could break it down at that level. But
I think if you don't speak the source language, getting at the original meaning by reading multiple translations, I think that's a great way to do it because
mm,
what you have at least is multiple opinions about the original thing. And that I think that would get you closer, not further away in general. One I was going
right.
to say
And
about justice that one of the interesting things, if you follow and you figure out the family saga that's going on here, and you go back to Pelops and then it goes back to Tantalus, that it's not obvious who is wronged first. Now the
yes.
Atreids, like the house of Atreus, is cursed, and that's like we can talk about that. So they seem to be, I guess we'll see how the rest of the trilogy goes, but a little bit more wrong in some way, or they've definitely wronged some people in the past. But when you go, if you just read the play and you go like, oh, that's weird, Clytemnestra murdered her husband, and then this other guy, who's this guy, just shows up on stage. Now it's a coup. He just took power. Like, what the heck is that? But he has this old beef. But then in that generation too, there's something, and then in the previous generation, there's something. So talking about like, oh, and a thing that came up earlier, a good definition of a Greek tragedy. Like in the process of reading this, I was trying to figure out. This was something I did look at the secondary sources for. Like, how do scholars of this stuff define tragedy, as it's not just like a story that's sad or something, as opposed to at the end there's a wedding, right? There's something else, and people will talk about, a fatal flaw, like you mentioned. But one of the things that I did see that comes up that was different from what you'd said was that this flaw was somehow necessary, and I didn't see that it was inevitable, but there was something about it that like they couldn't have done otherwise. Not that they could have, but something was just set up and they were headed for it. And I guess maybe we'll read more tragedies, or we can see what more scholars have to say about that particular thing. But looking at the this power battle that we've been talking about, it's easy to see how some of this is just, it becomes fatalistic, that it couldn't have been otherwise than it was. And one little example of that, talking about Agamemnon being, was he dumb, or why did he sacrifice it? It seems crazy. Why do you sacrifice your daughter to get the ships to move? They're trying to launch for Troy, and his priest Calchas tells him that Artemis needs him to sacrifice his daughter, otherwise the ships won't move. And what does he say? He says, "My fate is heavy either way. Heavy if I refuse to obey, and heavy too if I kill my child, pride of my house, staining these fathers' hands with streams of maiden blood spilled at the altar. Which way is free from evil? Can I desert my ships? Fail all my allies? For in the eyes of heaven, that they, with too eager passion, should crave a sacrifice, even of maiden blood, to still the winds is right. May it all be for the best. So he's not just like, all right, yeah, I'm going to kill my daughter. He's like, he's the commander of this army, and he's decided that this score needs, well, how going after Paris and Helen is a whole separate thing, but whatever. They're in motion now, and he's in this position, and somebody, his authority, we go, well, you don't sacrifice daughters to make wind come, but in his worldview, that is exactly what you do, especially if your priest is telling you that that's what you need to do. So the fatalism and the notion of justice in all of this is, it seems like very strong, that like just the wheels started turning 50 years before any of these people were born in one way or another. And okay, the Iphigenia thing, that's kind of new, but some of it couldn't have been otherwise, it seems. And
Yes,
yeah,
that's very interesting. I mean, I do remember. I remember that that part, the lines you just read, because to me it reads, and again, this is probably my modern projections, but it reads a little neurotic. Like he's sort of like, all my generals are in their boats, and like I have to answer to them. So like, if I don't, and it actually reminds me, there's
I
a
would
line
say,
in Tolstoy where it's talking about Napoleon getting ready to cross this river, which is like, it's like the Rubicon essentially. It's like he'll have to attack Russia once
that's
he and
something
there's a Tolstoy line where he's basically saying like Napoleon before he crosses this river was like the least free man in Europe, even though he's supposed to be the most powerful man in Europe because he's like there's financial backers that want him to cross. His generals expect him to cross. There's people preparing the logistics who think he's going to cross. And it's like no individual has ever had more pressure on them to do something. And that sort of reminded me of Agamemnon in the boats and there's no wind. It's like the
yeah,
whole world is looking to him saying,
make
"How are
something
you going to
happen.
start this war?" So again, to me that's so modern, right? Like when I think of the ancient world, like why did Agamemnon sacrifice his daughter to go to Troy? And it's like, oh, bloodthirsty king. He made whatever decisions he wants. He's like an insane tyrant in a way we don't have. But then, as presented, it's like, no, he's like, oh, all these guys are in their boats. Like, what are we going to do? They're already prepared to move. Like, I have to, it's my responsibility. It's a little bit, it's different than I would have expected it. And I, I sort of hesitate to go into the free will and fate discussion. I do remember in college having a discussion that the Greek concept of fate was more complicated than we might imagine, in that they believed that for some of the gods at least, like time did not flow as it did for humans. So gods to some extent know what's going to happen. And that's why oracles and diviners like Cassandra can see the future. But that just means they exist in different places on the timeline at once. And for humans proceeding in the moment, they are still able to make choices. Uh, so, in other words, the Greek concept of fate had somehow uh, like syncretized that fate is fixed, but that humans have free will as they're proceeding. And so I think like the tragic, I think you're right that I oversimplified when I said like they could have made better choices, but it's something about human failings like leading to uh, these inevitable downfalls. And I also think the concept of curse is really interesting because another way to look at this play is there is a metaphysical read, you could say, that actually like the actions of the people really don't matter because Agamemnon's line is cursed. So no matter what he does, um, like tragedy is going to befall him, and it's not really his failing. It's just his line is cursed. But one thing that's interesting to like bring in about that is just remind ourselves. I think in the modern world, this is one area where the culture of the past might actually be different. Is because we have a worldview, whether or not we're Christian, where there's one God and the God we believe in is righteous. a curse would probably mean that you like deserve to be cursed. Like if God has cursed your line, you must have done, I think of Cain. Like Cain's line is cursed because he killed his brother. Um, but it's in the Greek times, I believe anyway, like a god could curse your line for because these gods had human qualities. A god might curse you, or some other entity might curse you for reasons that were themselves not just. They're just angry at you, you know.
Well, this is worth one of the rabbit holes that I went down was I looked at the story of, so we talked about Thyestes and Atreus, and they have their competition, but these two brothers, they were thrown out of Pisa, the kingdom of Pisa. They were the sons of a king Pelops, and Pelops, he had them and a bunch of other children, but then he had a stepchild with a nymph whose name was Chrysippus, and the two brothers, Atreus and Thyestes, they were jealous of him, or there was some kind of he was in line for the throne or something, or he was Pelops' favorite. They killed him, and so then Pelops banished them from Pisa.
Mm.
But then Pelops himself, he has this drama where he loved this woman, the woman he eventually married, whose name Hippodamia, and her father was the king of Pisa before, and her father, Inomaeus, had heard he had a prophecy told to him that was he would be killed by his stepson. So he didn't want his daughter to get married. And so whenever a suitor would, but he was the king, so he had lots of suitors because they wanted to marry the princess. And so whenever they would come, he offered them, he said, if you can beat me in a chariot race, then you can have my daughter and have my kingdom. But if I beat you, then we're going to be put to death. And apparently 18 suitors were put to death in this way. And their heads were displayed around his palace and whatever. And so then Pelops is the 19th suitor, and he comes along, and what does he do? He makes a deal with the charioteer, Inomaeus' charioteer, whose name is Myrtilus, and he says, if you will help me win this race, I will give you half the kingdom. And so what Myrtilus does, he agrees, and they put wax spokes in the wheels or something, so it doesn't like fail right away. But in the chariot race, eventually, Inomaeus is like about to win, but then his chariot like collapses because it's got wax in it or whatever, and he's dragged along by his horses and dies. And so then Pelops, now he has the princess, he's going to marry the princess, he has the kingdom, but now he has this guy Myrtilus who he has to split the kingdom with. What does he do? He kills him. And with his dying breath, Myrtilus curses him and all his descendants. So this is Pelops is the father of the fathers of Agamemnon and Aegisthus. So this is like the grandfather.
So that's the origin of the curse.
Well, I think that's the origin of the curse. But then there's this other thing, which is that Tantalus is the father of Pelops. So there's that drama with Pelops, right? But then Tantalus is this legendary figure who apparently he's like a human who was allowed to hang out with the gods, but he also did this thing where he killed, that's what it was. He killed Pelops, he killed his own son, and served him to the gods to see if they were really omniscient, to see did they really know everything. But the gods knew what he had done because they are omniscient, and then they punished him, but they brought Pelops back to life. That's why Pelops is alive. But
yeah, I was going to ask how.
I thought you just told this whole story. Yeah. But
yeah.
The thing is that obviously mirrors what Atreus. What Atreus did to Thyestes is he killed the sons. It wasn't his own son; it was his brother's sons. It was his nephews. But he killed them and tried to feed them to people, or he did. He succeeded. Atreus succeeded. Tantalus failed. And Tantalus, and there's two other things. He stole ambrosia from the gods, and he also had some secrets that he had learned from hanging out with them that he told to people. And so he was punished by, this is where we get the word tantalizing. His punishment is that he's in water and there's like grapes hanging up above, but whenever he tries to get the grapes, they recede, and whenever he tries to drink the water, the water goes down. So he can't drink and he can't eat anything. But that's being tantalized, is like you want something and you can't have it. So talking about the curse, that is, if the curse originates in the thing with Pelops and Myrtilus, which is, that seems like where it comes from, even though there's the side thing with Tantalus, that is a fairly just curse, just to fill in that gap. In this case, I think you're right. It is often that the curse might be unjust and gods can just do something for no reason. But in this case, there is something about this family or Pelops or whatever. I mean, that's a pretty tricky thing to do, is you kill the king and then you kill the traitor who betrayed the king. I don't know. It's that
Yeah,
one
it's
seems
interesting
earned.
though. It's interesting to think about what their perspective was on curses traveling through a bloodline, because another potential point of departure, and I don't know how I feel about this, is, you know, like Old Testament versus New Testament is a pretty big change of like the sins of the father falling on the son. And I think it's the modern Christian world, I think, has developed more of an idea that, you know, sin should die with the committer. They should not be inherited by the children. But I think the Greeks hint at a sense of the injustice of that a curse would follow your progeny, and yet they seem resigned to the reality of that. And there is this sense of like social roles having more permanence. Like, for example, this play is obviously interested in when will cycles of violence end. And it's very interesting that it does seem like the Greek perspective, having read ahead into the other plays too, is like they don't zoom out and take a meta perspective. They do heavily identify with the figure where they say, well, yeah, Agamemnon had to kill Iphigenia, but Clytemnestra has to kill him. And then they say, well, Orestes has to kill his mother because she killed his father. And they are slightly interested in the conversation of, but why did, like, because in modern day we would say, well, if Clytemnestra was justified in killing Agamemnon, then Orestes has no justification in killing her because she did something justified, so Orestes should get over it. That's, I think, the modern view. If like someone has avenged a sin 1-to-1, then it's done. But it does seem very natural for the Greeks to say, well, yes, she was justified in killing Agamemnon, but that means Orestes is justified in killing her, and then what do we do? And that's interesting that
But this
they,
might be lessons learned from centuries of blood feuds that at some point you have to let it go. And if you look at it, yeah, if you step one step back and say like, all right, this has been settled, then otherwise, yeah, you're going to bring more on your own descendants and whomever. But
yeah, no, but again, it seems like this is again an instance where I would say, like, even if their conclusions were slightly different than our own, they were definitely grappling with stuff that, like, you would talk about in law school today. Like, we haven't really philosophically moved on or resolved any of the
well,
questions, or we've resolved them slightly differently, but we still see the same like pitfalls that they were
we
grappling with.
might say, oh, how could Clytemnestra kill her husband? That's murder or whatever. And she should just have taken him to court or something or reported the crime. He's the king. What do you do when the state is doing the thing and you have no recourse? Right. So this is,
Right,
yeah,
and
it's a very
court is
modern
invented in
problem.
the third play, so there's no court for her to go to yet.
Yeah.
Um,
So it's not as if like, oh, naughty, naughty past, you shouldn't be doing those things. These are, if you actually look at the situation, I mean, if it's just her and she wants to have power, then that's separate. But if the blood of her daughter is on the ground, and how can she write that in some way? I mean, I'm not saying that
yeah,
the answer is definitely to kill him, but there isn't a long list of things that she could do.
but
Something.
okay. So another question I wanted to ask you, slightly different, because I kind of love stuff like this in modern art, but like the murder, the central elements of which is like the big act, the killing of Agamemnon and Cassandra. Do you think it's correct to say they sort of happen off stage? I mean, it is described, noises are described, but it's not like a huge, um, action scene. You're sort of with the chorus, like hearing screams. Um,
Yeah. Well, I think in mind, like doors opened or something. I don't. I feel like it. Yeah. It does seem like it's off stage. There will be, and I maybe that's because he was in a bath. I don't remember if the version I
It
read
also seems
specifically said
like
that
the
he was in a bath.
center of our attention, it seems like remains uh like out front of the keep or the castle or wherever they are, and like things that happen inside the castle are described or referenced, or you hear things, and then Clytemnestra comes back out. So it's almost like the camera doesn't move. But I didn't know if that was a function of it would be difficult um to sort of portray that on stage like a violent murder, but there must be other Greek play. I just really like it because I like the idea. I think it's sort of haunting. You have this dopey chorus that doesn't understand what's going on, and it's almost like you stay with them while the most terrible thing is happening, so you can see them freak out and try to grapple with.
Well, that whole the I have the Oxford University Press translation. That whole scene where Cassandra is like having her visions is very horror show. Like it's surprisingly modern, and there's like she's describing all the. I see the children. I see children in front of me, and their guts are hanging out, and whatever. It's a 21st century horror movie easily, and but I think also it's worth mentioning. So you were just talking about being the vision being outside the palace. We're sort of like standing outside the door, and then stuff is happening inside, and then she comes out. I think probably the scene changes were part of it, but it's worth mentioning. I think Aristotle says of Aeschylus that he was the first playwright to have more than one, have like, have characters talking to each other instead of just to the chorus, which that's like a
Mm.
very different vision of what we imagine a play is like humans bouncing off of each other and doing, human stuff.
So we talk about breaking the fourth wall. Aeschylus broke the first wall,
He broke the
which was
first
just
wall where the
characters
characters
talking
talk
to
to
each
each other.
other.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I just read that online, so maybe there's a little more nuance to it. But the thing is, you can kind of see it because the chorus. I mean, for me, this is the first. I don't remember that Antigone has a chorus. I guess maybe it does, but the characters aren't talking to them. I don't remember. But this thing where like there's this group of people, and the characters are like telling them what's going on, but those people are not exactly a character in the story. I wasn't used to this at all. And so to move from that to the characters talking to each other is already a pretty big move, if that was something that was kind of happening at the time, whether or not Aeschylus was like the key guy in doing it. But having the scene move around would have been also a pretty big. Well, I guess at the beginning there is the Watchman, but the Watchman might be kind of
But the
infinite
Watchman's
here.
still in the same place. He's just
Yeah,
on the top of a building
yeah. So they might
where
have like
we're in the square.
yeah. So having scene changes, I mean, we'd have to look into the history of drama, like when did scene changes become a thing? But yeah,
Yeah.
it's very, not primitive is the wrong word, but like all the components of modern theater and movies and whatever that we think of definitely were not there yet.
That actually helps me too, what you just explained, because I had not read that. And I think many of the things Clytemnestra and Agamemnon say to each other, it's like they're saying for observers. So it's almost like Aeschylus didn't make the move fully yet, where he's like, I'm going to have them talking to each other, but really they're almost addressing the
They- are
chorus.
they're talking next to each other, kind of. They're not exactly
Yeah,
talking
yeah,
to each other. But
yeah.
yeah, let me see.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think of those things as innovations that need to be made. Because
Because we
again,
can't
I would have
imagine it
thought,
without them. Yeah.
yeah, I would have thought when you come up with the idea of a story, it seems natural to be like,
But what it is, I think it's kind of the incremental move from Homer. Homer is just a guy
mm,
telling a story, right? And so then if you have like multiple people involved, then it's going to go little by little. They're not necessarily going to immediately have the idea of like, oh, let's have like 10 people all representing different characters and they're all going to say different things. I know it's yeah.
okay, here's another thing I need to get to though because
Mm.
of that. Was Aeschylus woke? Because I think there's a certain perspective on this stuff that's like, and I don't think Plato and Aristotle were contemporaries of Aeschylus. I think they were slightly after, if I have the dates correct. So like they would have read his plays and seen them performed, but
Wait,
I
sorry, who
think
Aeschylus and who?
Plato and Aristotle. I think
Oh, yeah. Let's see. Oh, we should know this. They're close. Plato and so
I think
Aristotle
there's
is the
slight
student.
overlap, but Plato is after.
Yeah. Plato is before Aristotle, but I don't know what the relationship
Yeah.
is Plato to Aeschylus. There's
I think Plato is slightly after Aeschylus,
okay, that's what
maybe
you're
with
saying.
a
Okay,
little bit of overlap. I
yeah,
can confirm that in a sec, but you know, many of the philosophers like didn't like Homer and sort of thought like I had this idea again, more modern projections. I had this idea that like Homer is portraying like classic heroism and there is definitely like thematic and moral complexity in Homer, but it is still a certain from the Greek perspective like a trad story, and the philosophers are like grumbling about it. They're like, actually, kings can be stupid and women can be really smart, and there is no justice because there's cycles of violence. And Aeschylus is like, I got you, dog. I'm gonna write woke Homer. I'm gonna
Whoa,
take the story and insert all these like postmodern Greek pomo themes into the Homeric stories. Like, I
well,
wonder if there's an element of that going on.
yeah, there certainly might be an element of it, and I hope that being influenced by Plato doesn't qualify one as being woke, but who knows? But the
Well, it's all relative.
it's all
Woke
relative, yeah, for
relative
those
to
days,
Homer.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
But the first thing that comes to my mind though is that in the beginning of the Iliad, the drama is basically set up by Agamemnon again being kind of a douchebag. He has this concubine. I've read these names. I don't know how to pronounce them. It's Chryseis, I think. And so he has this girl, and then her father comes, Chryses, and he's a priest of Apollo, and he says, "Look, I've got all this gold. Just take all my gold, give me my daughter back." And all the troops say, "Oh, take the ransom. That seems great. Get the money, whatever." And Agamemnon said he taunts the priest really badly, and he says, "She's going to share my bed. I'm going to bring her back to wherever. Like, get lost, no chance." And so then the priest of Apollo leaves because he's like an old guy, and I don't remember if he tells Apollo about this or Apollo just takes it upon himself, but he sends a plague on the Argive army, and they're dying in droves, whatever. And to correct that, Agamemnon, he agrees to give Chryseis back, but then he takes, again, I don't know how to pronounce this name, Briseis, the concubine of Achilles, in order to take Chryseis' place. He takes Achilles' concubine, and then Achilles now is not. He refuses to fight because I don't know if probably because he's been dishonored and maybe also because he really liked Briseis, probably just for honor. But he then refuses to fight, which is why for 9 years they can't win the wars because they don't have Achilles fighting with them. So the point is, the Iliad doesn't show Agamemnon to be a terribly capable guy either.
Yeah.
In terms of decision making and management, he's not a great administrator really. But yeah, there might still be some of what you're talking about.
No, Homer is definitely much more complicated than I'm giving him credit for in that glib remark, but I'm just wondering if there's some dynamic here. And I did
Yeah.
check the dates. Plato was born 25 years after Aeschylus died.
Well,
So,
but then we have to ask about Socrates. So Plato was
yeah,
like 28 when Socrates died. So Socrates is in the previous generation, and he of course didn't write
yeah.
anything, but he would have been hanging out and walking around. So Aeschylus, it's possible, this is a conjecture, but he might have been influenced by Socrates, even though he
Yeah, and
couldn't have read it
Socrates was
right.
woker than Plato. So, and even more sort of undermining and subversive.
Definitely.
So,
Yeah.
he could have been the woke Homer initiator.
Yeah. I had a note about foreshadowing. Cassandra said it's hardly foreshadowing, it's more of just like a total giveaway. Cassandra says at one point, oh, she's being killed, I think, or she's about to be killed. Yet my death too will not go unavenged by heaven, for there will come in turn another to avenge us, a son who will slay his mother, requite his father, an exile and a wanderer, hounded far from his land. He will return to put the capstone on this killing of his kin. So it's like, I guess the suspense was not really a component here, or maybe this adds to what you were saying, that maybe everybody just would have known these stories. It's not about the
Mm.
drama unfolding, it's about the treatment of them. Everybody knows what's going to happen, but like, what are the words used and how do the actors do it and whatever. But she just says like, here's what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
And
And that could be part of the death being off stage too. It's like everybody knows Clytemnestra
yeah,
kills them. It's
yeah.
not
Well, and that
what's
who knows?
interesting is how the characters react.
There might have been a censorship component to that too, that like depicting death on
Mm,
stage. Who knows? I don't know. There might have been something
yeah.
like that.
No, it's very interesting. There's one of the rabbit holes I got down with this is this isn't really directly in the Oresteia, but I mean there's such genius even in the myths you've just been describing. You talked about Tantalus serving his children to the gods and then that being changed to serving the children to the brother. There's like this fractal quality of the themes changing slightly, and like this is how Jonathan Peugeot and other sort of interesting Christians talk about the biblical stories, that it's like a spiral. It's like the story is repeating over and over, but they change slightly, and there's sort of like a collective thematic genius that comes out of that corpus. And the Greek stuff seems like that too, where like the way things are changing and iterating is so interesting. But one of the big rabbit holes I went down was there is this whole thing that Gerard talks about of like a great violent crime being at the foundation of a city or the foundation of a civilization, and that being in the Greek and later like Roman myths and also in the Christian myths with Cain and Abel. And that's represented in this play in a way because it's saying like the origin of trials of courts is this horrendous family drama that like needs to be ended, and so it necessitates some civic development. But that's such a to me, maybe that is a part of Greek thought that's alien from today, because I think we're so loath to admit that sometimes these terrible things are necessary to uh, create the new institution, the new procedure we need. But the Greeks seem obsessed with that the good thing would become bad or the bad thing would become good, or out of tragedy renewal. They seemed very attuned to like the humors needing to be in balance, and the capacity for some great tragedy to invent something or change something important.
On along those lines, I have a passage that I'd marked about evil begetting evil. I don't remember what's here, but it seems like it might be relevant to that. Let's see what it says. An ancient saying. Wait, who's this talking? Is this the chorus? Oh, somebody talking for a long time. Yeah, it's the chorus. An ancient saying, still repeated, still believed, proclaims that great prosperity, once it has reached full growth, turns to begetting, does not die childless, and from the high state of a house's fortune, a quenchless misery is born. But I am alone in thinking otherwise. An evil act is all that fathers more evil after it, or either that fathers more evil after it. The son follows in the father's footsteps. For when a house is just, its children are the beauty of its fate. And I'm going to stop there because it's kind of dark in here and I can't quite read it. But that's talking about evil begetting evil. And
Yeah, well, that's interesting. Who's speaking there?
that's
That's
the
the chorus, or
chorus.
that? Okay, that's interesting because they start by saying some people say, or
Yeah,
it's an
there's
old
this
saying
saying,
that,
yeah, but I
yeah,
disagree. Yeah.
yeah. I think I definitely agree with the saying and appreciate that. But it's interesting that both those ideas were present and at work enough to be presented in contrast.
Yeah. Well, at least in the thing with this curse on the Atriids, it does seem like evil begetting evil. At least in this
Yeah, but
story
it's
so far.
funny the first thing they describe is definitely it's funny that it's literally the meme, right? It's like hard men create good times create
Yeah, yeah,
weak
yeah.
men. Like that's the idea that's being summarized, that sort of wealth uh or success beyond a certain point just breeds, greed and incompetence.
So yeah, I guess we can uh, leave it there.
Okay.
Yeah.